Silver Spring, Maryland, at the General Conference headquarters in the White Estate, and it's under glass, and you're not allowed to thumb through it like that because the oil on your hands is going to mess up the pages. But hey, we don't have that here. Okay, so you're going to hold it up, and I'm going to ask some questions of these people. You got to turn around.
Oh, okay. Do I have to open it?
Yeah, not for this one. She three different times she held a big Bible like this, and one of the times she had it open and was pointing, turning the pages and pointing. But on this one, you can just hold it. Okay, outstretched arm, like okay. Okay. So meanwhile, while they're doing that, let's talk. Okay. So Ellen was 17 years old. How much did she weigh? She weighed about 70 pounds. And she's holding up this 20-pound Bible. Okay? Now, how tall was she? 5, yeah, 5'2"-ish. Yes. Okay, how much did Ellen weigh when she was a retiree? Officially, she weighed 140, so twice her weight from when she was a kid, because she had been very sick when she was a child. I think that is probably... It worked, yes. Okay. Maybe some other people can do that a little bit later. Okay, next question. Uh-oh.
I just wanted to recall a memory I have from my childhood. I was in an Adventist elementary school in Gentry, Arkansas, and I think I must have been about the 7th grade, 1959 or 60. And D.A. Delafield was secretary of the Ellen G. White Estate at the time, and he was traveling around visiting elementary schools and sharing things from the E.G. White Estate. Mm-hmm. And he had the original Bible that, of course, then I weighed less than 70 pounds probably and likely couldn't even lift it up. But that's a powerful memory that I have of
yes.
actually seeing that book and having it in where we could hold it.
Yes, yes. And it's really not any proof of anything in the life of Ellen White. Ellen White didn't even know about it. She was in vision. You know, she didn't know. But her parents, this was in her home. And her parents told, I think it was J.N. Loughborough, who was our first Adventist historian, the story. And so that's how we know. But there were 2 other times when she held a big Bible. One of them, some people were there that were saying that she couldn't really do that. And so she was holding up the Bible, turning the pages, and pointing out texts and quoting those texts. Okay? I don't know. But old enough that one of those 2 guys, they got a ladder and stood up and checked to see if what she was pointing to was really what she was quoting, and it was. Yes. I don't think they became believers even with that. Yes. Yes, sir.
Some people claim that some of Ellen G. White prophecy was false and hasn't been fulfilled or doesn't fulfill. How do you explain this?
Oh, that her prophecies weren't fulfilled? Do you want to name one?
I don't remember, but yeah, I read some article and some YouTube videos and
YouTube videos. Yeah, you learn a lot of things from YouTube videos. Yes.
Yes.
Well, first of all, I don't think that her main mission in life was to prophesy. I think her main mission in life was to teach people the different ways that they can help to return to God's original purpose for them. She taught and she wrote. There is one statement that she made that I'm not aware that has ever come to pass. And that was, she said that a sanitarium would be established at what is now Andrews University. I don't know if there's been sanitariums all over, everywhere, that are not denominational. That one, I don't know. So I kind of have that same question, but it has nothing to do with my faith in Ellen White. Yes. Okay. All right.
You've studied Ellen White's life extensively. Is there any particular moment or experience that she had that you find really interesting, or anything particularly that you enjoyed learning about or reading about?
That I find particularly interesting?
About her.
I like it all, actually. In particular, that's a hard question. Because I became a widow, I especially researched the time when she became a widow, because I had always read, or at least thought, that you're not supposed to mourn when someone dies or something like that. But as I searched in her writings, I found that not only did she greatly mourn, I mentioned this morning, that she didn't know what to do with her life, that she felt like totally lost. And so I have particularly appreciated that, because I can relate to that. And someone asked me, did I leave my water back there? I can't live very long without water. Someone asked me what are my favorite Bible verses. It's kind of along the same line. There's a couple of verses in Luke chapter 2 about Anna the prophetess. She was 84 years old, she was childless, and she was a widow. Well, okay, I'm not 84, but I'm getting there. I'm 75, okay, and a widow and childless. But the amazing thing about that old lady was that when she recognized who Jesus was as a baby, what does the verse say? She shared that information with all who were looking for redemption in Jerusalem. How did she know who was looking for redemption in Jerusalem? Was it everybody? No. How did she know those people? We are told in the Spirit of Prophecy that we should know the spiritual condition of our neighbors. Do we? Probably not so much. As I read this Spirit of Prophecy, she was probably part of a small group of people who were faithful in Jerusalem, and they were reading the prophecies and thinking it's about time for the Messiah to appear. And it's like there would be a study group, like we would have a study group today. And so she knew that those people were looking for redemption in Israel. And besides that, she probably knew their parents and their grandparents and their great-grandparents, because she was so old. And she probably knew their children and their grandchildren and so forth. She knew the spiritual condition of the people in Jerusalem. Pretty amazing. Okay, next.
Could you tell us a little bit about the unpublished articles and why they were unpublished? And yeah.
Okay, it's a hot question. There were many unpublished articles and manuscripts up until just a few years ago. Some of them were not really good for public consumption. There was one in particular that I remember. It was part of the Z file. That's what it was called back then, the Z file. And this letter was written to a pastor on a different continent. This pastor was sexually abusing all of his female church members, particularly the children. But he was convinced in his own self that he was not sinning because he didn't go all the way with them. Ellen White saw this in a vision, and she wrote him a very, very serious letter and told him to cut it out right now and don't tell anybody what he had done. Just stop doing it. Don't even confess it to your wife. Just stop. There were letters like that, a few letters, like not very many, but a few. Ellen White, by the way, was always much more stern with the leadership than with the common church people. But anyhow, on either this letter or another similar letter, it came down through the family, and there was a grandson or great-grandson, I don't know, of a person like this who had received this kind of letter. And he contacted the White estate, and he said, "If you publish that letter, I will sue you." And the White estate, from time to time, they got those kinds of remarks from people. And so they waited until the time passed, okay, until the grandchildren and great-grandchildren were no longer alive or aware that they were alive. And so then they published the letters and manuscripts. Another thing, too, there was a time, not too many years ago. Well, it was not too many years ago to me. To you, it would be ancient history. Like in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, when there were a lot of people who were very concerned about these self-supporting ministries. Okay? They were like offshoots. They were horrible. And they were the brethren were not going to allow these people to have access to the letters and manuscripts. Who knew what might happen? Okay. And so things have changed. Nowadays, the brethren are more in alignment with the self-supporting work than with some of our major churches, because there's been a big shift in theological beliefs, understanding, and so forth. Next.
This isn't actually about Ellen White, it's someone connected to her, Sarah Peck.
Sarah Peck was her nurse, her housekeeper, her assistant, her boss. Sarah Peck was a very bossy person, but she ran a tight ship, and she wouldn't allow just anybody to come and visit Ellen White. They had to have a good reason to come and visit Ellen White. And in much insignificant things. Ellen White used to like to eat cooked greens. Okay, you probably know this story. And they went up to the cafeteria at the sanitarium near PUC, and went into the cafeteria, and that day they didn't have any cooked greens. So Sarah McInturfer, you're wanting to know about Sarah Peck, aren't you? I'm sorry. Well, I'll finish the story. So Sarah McInturfer said, "Mother, you have to have your greens." So she marched in the kitchen and came back with some greens for Ellen White so she could have her everyday greens. And Ellen was embarrassed and said, "I don't have to have my greens every day. Just cool it a little." Okay, Sarah Peck. Sarah Peck was an educator. I don't know a whole lot about Sarah Peck, but you can find a lot of books that were either written or edited by Sarah Peck. She was maybe a little bit later. So what can you tell me about Sarah Peck?
Well, I'm just familiar with one book she wrote, but I know that she actually spent some time with Ellen White.
Yes, she did.
I was curious about that.
Yes, I don't know very much about that. Sorry, I'll have to read up on that. Okay. Yes.
Okay, this is another hot one. Kippa wants to know if Ellen White ate white rice. That's one. He literally wants to know. The second one, which is a bit more theological and more needed. This whole idea of the lesser light and the greater light.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I guess you can approach it however you think it seems best, whether in the sense of, is it lesser inspiration? Ellen White's writing in comparison to the Bible, as people say, lesser light and greater light. What have you learned as far as that goes?
Okay, I think the official teaching on that is that the Bible is the greater light because it contains all that we need for salvation, and her writings are supplemental in the sense that they, we're kind of dumb now, and so we need some help to understand what the Bible says. Well, I do, and so that was the function of the lesser light, to shine on the greater light. Ellen White continually said, don't take my words, read the Bible, study the Bible. That was one of her main topics. Go to the Bible. White rice? White rice? White rice? I don't know. Did they have white rice then? I don't know. You could have asked me a number of other foods that she did or did not eat, and I'll tell you what I've heard or learned or read or whatever. Uh-oh.
All right, so 2 questions. Mine is, what was Ellen White's favorite book that she wrote? And the second one is, where are all of her visions found?
Okay, good. She wanted everybody to read The Great Controversy. So I don't think she ever said what was her favorite book, but I would think that it would have been Great Controversy. Okay, and then where are her visions found? I hope you guys have the set, the 3-volume or 4-volume set of the Index to the Writings of Ellen White in your library. If you do, you need to read these. These are so valuable. Okay, in the third volume, R through Z, in the back, let me see, under Ellen White, there's a section called Biographical Data. And so it goes through from 1827 to 1840, 1841 to 1850, so on, all through her life, and it has all of these references and where you find it in Volume 2 of Spiritual Gifts or Life Sketches or wherever. Okay, there's pages and pages of her life. What was she going through? Where was she traveling to? Who was she writing to? All kinds of stuff like that. And that's called White LNG General. And then the next section is White LNG Visions. And so it's the third volume, and it starts on page 2978. And it lists her visions in order. The best that people have been able to determine, because she didn't always know. She didn't even know when it was her first vision. Well, it was in December, most likely after she had turned 17, and her birthday was the November 26th or something like that. So most likely it was in December, but it was before the end of the year. And so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, part of 7. And then there's a section of the approximate dating for some visions and visions of unknown date. So get this book and look it up way back in the back in the Ellen White Visions section. It's all written there. Okay? Next.
Okay.
No.
So I was watching a documentary once on Ellen White, and it was just going through, I can't remember exactly what the topic was, but they did an interview with one of her granddaughters, I believe.
Okay.
And the granddaughter specifically mentioned how Ellen White gave them hot chocolate once.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just wondering, could you shine any light on that, or do you know much about, hey, you brought up the food, so.
I have seen the same video.
Oh, yeah.
And so I know, and in fact, at the White Estate, there's a file called Questions and Answers, and one of the questions is about chocolate, hot chocolate. And apparently, yes, on rare occasion, she would allow the children to have hot chocolate. Okay.
Interesting, thank you.
All right, I have two questions similar. One, I heard that her and James White separated for a short period of time,
Yes.
and that either Haskell or Prescott wanted to marry her, and why did she not do that?
Okay. Yes, it is true that James and Ellen were not getting along very well. I think that was maybe in the early 70s. And the only reason we know about it is because some letters were discovered that where she had written about this to her best friend, and then she told the best friend to burn the letters, and the best friend didn't do that. And so the story is she was in Oregon, and James was in Battle Creek. And what correspondence they did over a few weeks period was very terse. Just not a good attitude at all. I think part of it was James White was pretty difficult to live with. He was very demanding, even of his associates, but certainly also at home. There was one time when she was telling him what to do, and he said, "Look, if you got this information from the Lord, okay, I'll do it. But it came out of your head, well, I have a head of my own." Okay. However, after a few weeks, Ellen went back to James in Battle Creek, and they lived happily ever after, maybe. Okay, after James White died in 1881, Elder Haskell's first wife, died. Ellen and Elder Haskell were really, really, really close friends. There's more correspondence between the two of them than anyone else other than her own family. He did propose to her. She thought about it. She decided she did not want to change her name, that it would not be good for her ministry. And so she turned him down, but she said, "You know, there's this lady whose name is Hetty Hurd. You should get to know her." And so he did. And so Hetty Hurd became Hetty Hurd Haskell. Okay. Yes.
So since we were going with the food thing, was Ellen a picky eater?
I think she ate very heartily. She also had difficulty with exercise because both of her ankles were broken when she was thrown off a horse at the family cabin in Colorado in the 1870s, I believe. So her idea of getting exercise was to go for a carriage ride because walking was painful. And because she had a good appetite, she gained a few pounds. Yes, yes. Yeah, she liked food. Yes.
So I was wondering if you could address, I think when I was discussing you earlier, earlier was mentioned the unpublished manuscripts. Are there any unpublished manuscripts now? Could you explain how that came to be and where they would find them, and that addressing that issue a little bit more?
Okay. Probably I should explain the White Estate. The reason it's called White Estate is because it is the estate of Ellen White. And she, in her will, she left her books, her writings, to a group of 5 men that she selected to continue her work. They were to produce compilations. They were to produce these books in other languages. There were several things that they were asked to do. So this became the White Estate. As the White Estate grew, there came to be branch offices of the White Estate. One was at Andrews, one was at Loma Linda, and one was at Oakwood, but now the one at Oakwood is somewhere else. I'm not sure where, because Oakwood became a part of the North American Division rather than the General Conference. So that was like the second tier. There's a third tier, which is the Ellen White Research Centers. Ellen White Research Centers and the branch offices and the White Estate have all had access to the unpublished letters and manuscripts forever. for as long as these entities have existed, they've had those copies of the writings, and they were physical copies that were sent to the institutions. And there's of the research centers, there's a couple of dozen of those around the world at this time. Generally, there's 2 in every division. So all of these entities have had the letters and manuscripts even when they were unpublished. And in order to see those letters, you had to have permission from your conference president or somebody that's really official, just in order to see one of the letters, but that was possible. Below that, there's another level, which is the Ellen White study centers. They do not have any of that. What they have is the complete writings of Ellen White and some extra things, some really good extra things, but they're not required to have all of that information, except now that it's available. And so what became available when the unpublished writings became published, they are published online. There is an app from the White Estate. You get this app, it is free, and you can look up any letter, any manuscript that is available to anyone in the world. I don't know of, it would be very, very difficult to compile a written copy, to produce a copy, because you'd have to copy each one individually to have an entire collection, but they are available.
That understand, except, I mean, so essentially, everything, there is no more unpublished, because they're all
There's
published.
no more unpublished.
Everything that we know of.
Everything that we know of
is available online.
Is online, yes.
To anybody.
Yeah, right.
I just want to make sure that was clear,
yes,
because I think there is a misunderstanding about, many people think there's still,
There's still that Z file, yeah. No.
Even
no.
the Z file is
The
unpublished.
Z file has been published also. That horrible letter is published.
Yeah.
You just don't know where to look for it. It's there. It's there. Have to go through a lot of letters to find it.
And it's all online.
It's all online. Yeah. Now, it is possible that there are letters that have not been discovered yet.
Explain that one.
Yes, I will. I will. Okay. The way that those letters are accumulated is from the descendants of people who had that correspondence. A few years ago, there was, I think it was Uriah Smith, one of the pioneers, could have been Joseph, probably Uriah Smith. The letters had been passed down to grandson, child, grandchild, great-grandchild, and somewhere along the line, these descendants were no longer Adventists, but they recognized the value of what was in the collection. So they contacted, in this case, Andrews University, and I believe it was Hedwig Jemison who took her vehicle, went to that place, loaded that vehicle, and took all of that material back to Andrews University and put it down in the basement. The way Andrews has worked, at least in the past, is when a graduate student needs a project, they're assigned that pile of documents to go through and identify them and document what they are and put them in boxes and so forth. And as they do this, they find these letters from Uriah Smith to Ellen White, or from Ellen White to Uriah Smith. And in either case, Those letters, when they're found, are sent to the White Estate to Tim Poyer, who has worked there forever and all of his life. And he looks at the letter and probably passes it around to some other people, and they decide whether it's genuine or whether it isn't. If it's genuine, then they make copies and send that letter to all of the entities that have letter collections, all of the research centers or on up, and it becomes part of the collection. The last I heard, down in the basement of Andrews University, there's still piles of contributions that probably have not been researched yet. So there could be more letters. And in fact, that's, let's see, I got off track a while ago. That's how the letters were found where James and Ellen were separated from each other. When the brethren at the General Conference realized that Ellen White and her husband were separated, they were just aghast. Okay, how do we deal with this? How do we tell the Adventists that Ellen White had this experience? She was supposed to be perfect. And the person who told me this was an employee of the White Estate who said that in his life he had gone through a divorce that he did not want. And it was very upsetting to him for probably a year. And it was during this time that the brethren learned that Ellen White and James had been separated. And so instead of being just horrified, this man was happy to know that what he had gone through as an innocent person, the pioneers had similar experiences. And so it was a blessing to him. Okay, next.
How many books have you read, like as far as Spirit of Prophecy?
In 1994, I decided that I would go get a master's degree, and I made all of the arrangements and everything, and then I talked to my husband. And he said he really didn't think that that was the thing I should do. There was going to be 2 years of my life, and so I decided in those 2 years I was going to read everything that was published in the Spirit of Prophecy. I did not read those big green books or purple books or whatever they are that I read from this morning. I did not read those. There may have been some odds and ends that I didn't read, but the bulk, I read everything that was published of the Spirit of Prophecy. Much of it I had read earlier when I came into the church in the early 70s. And pretty much for the past 50-some years, I've read Spirit of Prophecy every day. Okay. But of those letters and manuscripts, there's many, there's way too much for me to read if I read one every day for the rest of my life. There's a lot. It's hard to read it all. Okay.
Another question.
Yes.
Over the years, I've read quite a bit of Ellen White's counsel to A.G. Daniels.
Okay.
And some of that was pretty strong and stern counsel. And I had the idea that A.G. Daniels was quite an autocratic leader and you might say a micromanager. And I've had the idea that the leadership stamp that he placed on our church has carried through the decades since then. But recently I read a biography of his, the biography of A.G. Daniels, and it kind of softened my attitude a little bit toward him as I learned the environment and the milieu and the circumstances of the church during his ministry and his leadership. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
Yes, I have not read the book that you have read, but A.G. Daniels became acquainted with Ellen White in 1878 in Texas. A.G. Daniels was 20 years old at the time. He had lived in Iowa, and he felt that the Lord was calling him to be a preacher. He went to his conference president, and the conference president said, you can't even speak properly. What makes you think you can be a pastor? Because he had a lisp in his voice, and he couldn't talk very plain. And so he was not happy about that. He found out that R.M. Kilgore in Texas needed a tent master, and he and his wife went to Texas right then. Well, it just happened that James and Ellen White were living in Texas, or going to be living in Texas, that same winter. And they ended up living in the same house in North Texas. A.G. Daniels' wife became the cook in that household, and A.G. Daniels was the secretary to James White, and his job was, well, for one of the things that he did was round up the ponies when they got out of the pen, and things like that, just whatever. And Ellen White grew to love this young man who was actually approximately the age of her newly wedded sons, and so they became pretty close. A.G. Daniels got into the ministry in Texas, and he stayed there after James and Ellen White left. Ellen White, by the way, hated Texas. She didn't like their weather. Ellen White was a very refined kind of person. She was a very homey person. She wanted to have her family near and be a mommy. She never wanted to be a prophet. I lost my train of thought. Yeah. Yes. Okay, so Ellen White leaves. A.G. Daniels stays in Texas, and they correspond about some of the problems in Texas, because Texas was a pretty wild place. Oh, I was going to tell you about Ellen White. She really didn't like that women would dress in their fancy clothes and they'd be riding in their carriage and smoking a cigar and flicking the ashes. She didn't like that kind of, and in fact, she wrote about one young man who lived in Texas, and she wanted to send him to Battle Creek to meet some nice young lady, because there was no really nice girls in Texas. Okay, back to A.G. Daniels. Time passes, and A.G. Daniels goes to Australia. When Ellen White is sent to Australia, who was there to meet her at the dock? A.G. Daniels. Okay? So under her tutelage in Australia, he becomes a worthwhile administrator and, well, probably not pastor, because he wasn't that kind of person. Evangelist, yes, that would be good. And so, and they worked together in Australia as the the local conferences were developed and the Union Conference was developed. And then she was called back to the United States. 1901, 1902, 1903, those years of reorganization. They were looking for a General Conference president. The original idea was that they would not have a General Conference president, they would have three. They would have three people that were in charge of that. That didn't work out very well. And so they were asking Ellen White, who do you recommend to be president of the General Conference? And she said, well, there's nobody that's qualified. But I know that A.G. Daniels will work with me. And so I would recommend that name. Now, as far as his temperament, he was a fairly complicated person. But he was also the first person to travel the whole world because our denomination was growing at that time. We had work going on in Australia, work going on in Africa, and Europe, and so in South America. He would go to those places to encourage the brethren, all of those places. And so he became pretty well known as a traveling General Conference president, as did his successor, W.A. Spicer, who was a totally different makeup as far as a personality. There are people who think that A.G. Daniels did not believe that Ellen White was a prophet. That is a misunderstanding. What he said was that he had never seen her in vision. He hadn't. And so he could not say that she had visions. So he was really cutting it pretty close on what he would be willing to state. And yes, in a sense, he was definitely a strong leader. He was General Conference president from 1901 to 1922. And then the brethren decided they didn't want him for General Conference president anymore. They wanted Spicer, who was his secretary, I believe. And so those two guys just got their roles switched, where Spicer was the president and A.G. Daniels was the secretary, and so they continued to work along those lines. And that's all I know. Okay. Yes.
This time is not so hot.
Okay.
Okay. Somebody wants to know. Yeah, I'm in messengers for people. Somebody wants to know, how do you archive your quotes from Ellen White? If you do, like, how do you save them? And do you have a system, maybe something you can share with us about how to keep those, especially things that are more rare, not easy to be found?
The answer to that is pretty easy. I don't. I forget a lot. When something comes up, then it kind of triggers something in my mind. But generally, I'm really, really bad about saving and organizing anything that's written. I can't. Okay, so I have, you probably need to teach me. Okay, and there are many of you. You each have an experience, and so you could be up here telling your experience. Ellen White says that we should share our experience. Tell the experience that you've had, outlining step by step how the Holy Spirit has led you. You have that responsibility to God. Okay, share your experience. Okay, yes.
Man, I got 3 real doozies.
Oh, okay. I like those.
Okay, so first I'm going to ask for a friend. Considering recent events, we want to know, is there strong evidence to believe that Ellen White was vaccinated?
As far as I know, there is no strong evidence to believe that Ellen White was vaccinated. However, she did take X-ray treatments on a spot on her forehead, and I think it was, 20 X-rays on that particular spot. There's a book that's available on Ellen White and the vaccination issue, and on the Seventh-day Adventist stance on vaccination that covers all of that material.
Is that book called Restoring the Right Hand? Is that the book?
I only know it by the author. Who's the author?
Oh, I'm not sure. Who's the author?
Yeah, who's the author?
Okay. To be continued. Okay, so another one. Was she ordained?
No, except she was ordained by God.
Amen.
That was her answer. She was ordained by God. She didn't need to be, that's what she said. She didn't need to be ordained by me. And in fact, she never held a church office of any kind, anywhere, anytime.
Solid.
That's easy.
And the second one follows in suit with the second one. Oh, wait, I mean the third one goes into the second one. What did she say about women's ordination? I'm sorry I have to do it.
There were people in the late 1800s, there were female people in the late 1800s who held positions in the General Conference, and there were people who were female who were pastors. In many places. There were people who were female during wartime who pastored churches because the men were off to war. I haven't studied this topic because it wasn't interesting to me. But I would look to see what did she say about Deborah. Deborah was a leader of God's people. And the person that was supposed to go to war said, "I'm not going to war unless you go with me." And so she went with him. I don't like that subject. Okay. Yes. Hi.
Hi. So a quick question about, do you think that Sister White would have approved of inventions or technology that would create sustainability in our churches, our schools, our missions, our hospitals, things like that?
Okay, I have some stuff here somewhere. Maybe it's not here, maybe it's over yonder. Let me see what I can find. Oh, it's not there, not there, not there, not there. Maybe it is over there. It's right here. We see drawings of Ellen White, and she's holding a pen that looks like this. Here is the pen that she used, not this pen. But these are really popular right now. Fountain pens. She used a fountain pen. So that was a later technology. Yes, she was very much, yes, I believe that if she lived today, I think she would have an iPhone. I think. It's okay if you have your own opinion. Yes, I think she would have had a laptop or a desktop. I think she would have used all of the latest technology. She was very forward-looking. In fact, let me ask you a question. If Ellen White were living today, what kind of car would she drive? Sounds like there's a lot of opinions there. Is there anyone who would like to support your opinion on why you think that?
She would obviously get a Honda or a Toyota because, gas, mileage, money, savings, and it looks better too. But,
Anybody else have an opinion? Strong opinion? Let's look, okay, go ahead again.
I mean, I think she really encouraged country living, so she might have a truck. Maybe a Dodge Dually. So, just an idea.
Maybe she would have walked as Jesus walked.
Okay, let's look at the transportation that she did use. Yes, she had, she did not like lumber wagons. They were too bulky and too slow. What she did like was she liked like a, I guess you would call it a doctor's carriage because it was light and fast. She loved driving and she loved driving fast. Yeah. She did ride in a car. Her twin grandsons got a car, and they gave Granny a ride, and she said it was the smoothest ride she had ever had. Well, it was her grandchildren. What else would she say? But yes, I think she would want something that's cool and fast. And there was a little bit of pride there, too. There was a time when she arrived at a camp meeting, and they took her up in some kind of, I don't remember the name of the vehicle, but it was the finest of fine. And so she kind of talked about, I arrived in this vehicle. Yes. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry, I feel guilty because I didn't answer your last question.
Oh, that's fine. What's the feeling about the statement in second selected messages about smallpox vaccinations?
I don't know anything about it.
Well, it's actually by D.E. Robinson, but it's included in the book.
Yes, I'm glad you said that because there's people who don't recognize what you just did. There are people who would say, oh, it's in one of her books. This was her opinion. But in this case, it was D.E. Robinson's opinion. And I recently heard quotes about some problem in Ellen White's life. It was not written by her at all, but it's in one of her books. And so I appreciate you pointing that out. But the details on that, I don't know. I don't go into that area. Thank you. Okay.
I have two questions. I think you mentioned earlier this morning that she wrote a book for free. I was wondering, did she usually gain something from the books that she wrote?
Yes, that's where she got her money.
Okay.
And she and James were very liberal with their money. Mm-hmm. When the Dime Tabernacle was being built in Battle Creek in, when was that, 1873 or 4, something like that, there was a nationwide thing that you save your dimes and you send them one dime per month to build the Dime Tabernacle. That's why it was called that. James and Ellen White sent $1,000. Okay, they were very, very, very liberal. But there was also a lot of money coming in, and James was a real wheeler, dealer, entrepreneurial spirit, and so he could make money out of nothing. You know, he's buying and selling all kinds of stuff. So, yeah.
My second question, someone once told me of a story where there was a revival taking place in a school.
but the leaders kind of put a stop to it or tried to squash it because certain elements of didn't seem right to them. And supposedly Ellen White told them that there may never again be another revival of that school. And I'm wondering, I haven't read that story. I was just wondering if you had heard of it or read it or where that would be.
I've never heard that. If you find out, I would love to know.
Okay.
Yes, it doesn't sound right. It's maybe one of those apocryphal statements. And there are apocryphal statements. They're found in this same index to the writings of Ellen White in the back. There is a whole section of apocryphal quotations, several other in the whole index thing. And so there's a number of pages of apocryphal statements, and I'm sure there's quite a few more than there has been in the past. They kind of grow.
You mentioned about her sister, losing all relish for spiritual things.
Yes.
So I was wondering, what about like her parents, her brother, did they become Adventists? And then also, what about her contemporaries, like George Mueller and Spurgeon, were they aware of her, and what were their thoughts as far as you know?
In her family, her parents considered themselves to be Seventh-day Adventists eventually. Several of her sisters considered themselves to be Seventh-day Adventists. I don't know that they were ever baptized, but they considered that. Her younger brother died of tuberculosis before, very early in life, and so he would have been a Seventh-day Adventist. They were very close. The older brother had left home when Ellen was going through her experiences with being hit with the rock, and he became a successful businessman in Chicago. She kept contact. She wrote, corresponded with all of her siblings. And they were supportive of her work generally, but they were not known as bona fide baptized Seventh-day Adventists. What was the other question?
About contemporaries,
Her contemporaries. I don't know about her contemporaries, the well-known contemporaries. I've never researched that area, but it's a very, very interesting concept, and I'm sure there were people who did know of her, but they No? Oh, okay. Okay. So is my non-answer acceptable? Okay. There's another question over here.
Okay, I have two questions. So my friend asked me to ask this. Why did Ellen White write Adventist Home?
Why did she write what?
Adventist Home.
Okay.
And then, yeah.
Okay, on that one, she didn't. Adventist Home is a compilation. She actually wrote many articles about raising children. Probably the best would be she did a series of sermons from, was it 2 Peter? Or 1 Peter? 1 or 2 Peter, about and applying those principles to raising children. But you can look in the Adventist Home, look at where each of those compilations comes from, and read them in their context.
Okay, and my second question is, how big was the rock that hit Ellen when she was in 3rd grade?
Okay. The easy answer is we don't know. However, I was at the White Estate in October, and Jim Nix got me in because it was visitors were not allowed. And so he told me the story about he and Merlin Burt, who's now the director of the White Estate, they went up to Portland, Maine, and Jim wanted to get a rock from that area where the rock was thrown from. And Merlin Burt laughed at him because the whole thing had been paved. And so Jim noticed that there was this one place where they had been digging because they were going to put a light post in, and there were some rocks there. And so he got one of those rocks, and he took it to the White Estate, and it is on display. And it is less than, probably half the size of my fist. But we don't know. We don't know.
You said that James White had a strong character.
Yes.
Right? But did he have it like after his stroke? Did his personality change after that, or he always had like?
He was a pretty strong person always, except when he was a child. When he was a child, he got sick, and the sickness left him cross-eyed, and he couldn't go to school. He couldn't learn, and so he farmed until he was about 16. And then he noticed that his eyes were getting better and better and better. And so then he decided he wanted to continue his education. His parents wanted him to stay on the farm because he was good farm help. But he was determined that he was going to become an educator. And so he did have that characteristic of determination. And he lived at a time when men were men. And so, yes, he had a strong personality, but it was much more exaggerated after his multiple strokes.
Hello.
Hi.
So we were wondering, what was Ellen G. White's perspective or opinion on receiving financial aid or scholarships, like government funded?
Well, in her day, I don't think there was any such thing. But she did say that if all church members paid a faithful tithe, there would be no issue with having all Seventh-day Adventist students in our schools. That's probably the closest of any statement that I remember from her writings. Our schools were just developing in the 90s, and in her old age. I think it was Loma Linda that she had seen in vision, one of those hospitals in Southern California. I think it was Loma Linda. She saw in vision that this would be a great medical institution and would teach young people. And so she went to the conference and said, we need to buy this land. It's available now, we need to do it. And the conference said, no, it's not in our budget. We don't have this money. So she went to one of her wealthy old lady friends and talked to her, and the two old ladies put together their money, and they made the down payment on that land at Loma Linda. And then she took that document back to the conference and said, here, you take care of the rest of it. Okay. There was another time, I don't know if this was in Ellen White's, probably was in Ellen White's day. I don't think, could have been later. Loma Linda needed money. They were just going through growing pains and they needed money. And so the administrator of Madison College sent them the money. This was a self-supporting school sending money to Loma Linda, what became our medical center there. Okay. So things have kind of turned around a little bit. Okay.
Excuse me, that reminds me that Ellen White did sit on one school board during her career. That was Madison College.
That's true. That's true. She was on that board.
And that school began in 1908, was it, or 4? Something like that. So there wasn't too many years, but she was involved in her last years.
Yes.
And that's an encouragement to us.
It is. Yes, it is, because that was a self-supporting, that was actually the beginning of the self-supporting work for the Seventh-day Adventist Church. She was not happy with the way that our church was proceeding. And so she got Madison College going. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Okay. Anything? Okay, one more. Isn't supper at 5:30? Oh, it's 6? Okay.
Yeah, 2 questions. If Ellen White was here today, what do you think she would say in terms of what's, looking at where we are, what's going on? And number 2, what was her greatest burden for young people?
Okay, I think that if she were here today, she would say, "Praise the Lord." As far as her burden for young people, she had a greater burden for young people than any other group of people within the church, because young people have more influence than anybody else in the church. Because believe it or not, you, young people, are very, very influential to those of us who are older. And you are very influential to your peers. And little kids really look up to you. You are the most important people in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, period.
Okay, so I have another question. My friend asked me to ask, what was the question? Oh, how did James White die?
How did James White die? It was in, I believe it was August 1881. They had, James and Ellen had been speaking at a series of meetings, and he got sick, and they took him to the Battle Creek Sanitarium, and it looked like he was dying, and he was 60 years old. He was young. And Ellen White, she was also sick, but not as sick as he was. And so she went to talk to him, and And she said, "James, don't you want to live?" And he said, "No." And he died shortly after that. So I don't know what he had, just maybe pneumonia or something like that. I don't know.
If I understand it correctly, she said he died of overwork.
That is true. That is true. She said later that he had done the work of 3 men, and if more men had done their work, he would still be among them. That's exactly right.
So I was wondering if you could explain at the end of time what she said about how people would likely be relating to her and her writings. Specifically, I think you mentioned when we were talking about books, new books, etc.
She said that books of a different order would be written, and she said that her writings would be of none effect. The counter of that would be she greatly urged the concept of unity. So she felt, obviously, that people should press together. You've read that, press together, press together, press together. That we should seek to eliminate the differences among us. That we should be like those people were as they anticipated October 22, 1844, where they would go together to a grove of trees someplace out, and they would say to each other, "Have you seen anything in me that is not what it should be? Because I want to correct it before Jesus comes." She would love to have that happen in our day.
Two things. I noticed a bunch of stuff up here. Have you already been through all that stuff that you have up here?
No, I haven't, but we have a 7 o'clock meeting, so I need to have something for them.
Okay, well, maybe you're saving it then. Do you have one story that like stands out in your mind of her life that maybe not as well known, that you kind of think is like a favorite incident that illustrates her either personality or character, or her, you know, the courage with which she faced life? Something that is a story that just really rings with you.
I would say that's probably when she lived in Texas, because I was living in Texas at the time that I read these stories. I've already told you that she didn't like Texas for many reasons. The Reconstruction was going on after the Civil War, and so the Union soldiers were down there and they were burning anything they could burn, and so that the smoke from that caused her to feel that it was a difficulty for her heart. She didn't like the weather. They were living near the Red River, and normally the weather would be similar to here, but there would be occasionally weather like you had a couple of weeks ago, probably more often right down there because it was near the river. There was one time, I believe it was January 2, maybe, 1879, that it got really cold. Now, they were living in a new home, newly built and newly plastered. She had a room that was, I think, 20 by 20 upstairs. Her husband had a room that was the same size downstairs. In both of the rooms, there was a fireplace. That winter, it got so cold and so snowy that in the downstairs bedroom of James White. There was a box of apples that froze with the fireplace going 24/7. It was so cold that winter that the ink wouldn't flow for her to write until maybe 9 or 10 in the morning. And the worst part was they had to chop their teeth out of ice every morning. They had to chop their teeth out of ice. You know, you take your false teeth and you put them in a... Yes, she did. She wore, I guess, we had a dentist here. You can probably talk about this. Yeah, I guess you call it partial, whatever. But she had her last 8 teeth pulled by a female dentist in New Zealand, I believe. 8 teeth. So that means she had something else for the rest of those places for teeth. But when she had those teeth pulled, she told the dentist she did not want to have any anesthesia because she didn't want anything to interfere with her mind in case she had a vision. She was that dedicated to the Lord's work. And so the dentist pulled those last 8 teeth, and it made the dentist sick. So she had to go lay down. And so Ellen got up and ministered to the dentist. She was a tough old bird.
Do you have any stories regarding her sense of humor?
There are a couple that are well known. One is when the people in Japan sent her a vest. People in Japan have always been a very slight build, and Ellen White was not. And so she couldn't get that vest on. But she wanted to be gracious. And so she had her secretary write to thank whoever it was in Japan and say, thank you very much for the vest. That was very nice of you, but there's a whole lot more of Ellen White than many suppose. There was kind of an ongoing thing between her and Sarah McInterfer because Ellen White liked her greens. But Ellen White, she couldn't eat beans. She said it was poison to her. But Sarah McInterfer liked eating, I guess, like black-eyed peas, something like that. And so they were always kind of joshing each other back and forth. Ellen talking about Sarah McInterfer's eating cowpeas and versus the greens, and so that was kind of an ongoing thing. I'm sure there's many more stories because she did have a sense of humor, a very good sense of humor. I get scared when these men come up.
The one story we've heard is when Willie White, they traveled around together with his mother, and she was preaching one day, and he was sitting on the platform beside her, and he went to sleep. And the audience began to kind of laugh. And when she caught on what was going on, she says, well, he did that ever since he was a baby.
Yes, yeah, she explained that when he was a baby, she would put the cradle under the podium, and she would kind of rock it with her foot while she was preaching. And then, yeah, when he fell asleep on the platform, then she said, yeah, he got accustomed to that when he was a baby. That's very true.
Have a question. If she had like the health message and they had sanitariums, like why was she and James, like why were they so sickly?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Why were they sick so much?
Why was he sick so much?
Well, and her also.
Okay, she was sick because when she realized that she was going to have the prophetic office, she asked the Lord to please spare her the kinds of pain that she might have if she were physically abused and persecuted. And so the Lord said, okay, you won't have that, but anytime you start to feel proud, you're going to get sick. Okay, so it's not because of her health, it's because the Lord wanted to keep down that pride that she would naturally have had. As far as James, he got sick fairly early on, and they went to different doctors of the day, or health institutes of the day, because they hadn't had the health message yet fully. And up until the time that they did have the health message, they did the best they could with what they knew. Also, when their oldest son, Henry, got sick, he got pneumonia. It was a cold that went into pneumonia, and he died. They had heard about hydrotherapy at that time, but they were afraid to try to use it because they didn't know enough about it. And so he died, and then his younger brother got the same thing, and they said, well, we don't want the same result. We're going to try hydrotherapy, and the younger brother lived. Many, many, many years later, when Ellen White was an old woman, someone saw her pacing back and forth and wringing her hands and pacing back and forth, and they wondered what in the world was she thinking about. And it turns out she said, if only we had known back then what we know now, maybe we could have saved Henry. It's a growing experience.
How did James and Ellen meet?
James had a conveyance, and Ellen needed to go from place to place. And so James volunteered to take Ellen from place to place. They always had another woman, usually one of Ellen's sisters, to go with them because it wasn't a proper thing for an unmarried man and an unmarried woman to be traveling alone together distances. And somehow they got the idea along the way that it would be a good idea to get married, and that would take care of any gossip that came along. So, according to their story, that was it. Probably there was more. Okay. Okay, are we done? Any more questions? Why don't we reconvene at 7 o'clock? Have a good supper.